Swift is a modern programming language developed by Apple, and it's friendly for new programmers. Swift follows a principle that the obvious way to write your code should also perform the best. So the purpose of this video is to give you a quick introduction to the Swift programming language. And for those new to Swift, it's common that the first program you make prints Hello World to the screen. So in order to print in Swift, all you have to do is type in the keyword print, and inside the quotes, you type in the contents. There are two ways to define values. You can use let or you can use var. When using the let keyword to define a value, you cannot change the value because it's constant. Changing let to var turns object in sky into a variable, and this allows you to rename it. In Swift, every constant and variable gets assigned a type, and that type is based on either you explicitly giving it the type or by Swift inferring the type based on the value that you assign. In this example, x1 was inferred to be an integer and x2 was inferred to be a double. So when I try to add x1 and x2 together, an error comes up. This is because constants or variables with different types cannot be operated on together. So by making Swift infer x1 as a double will allow the operation. You can also explicitly assign x1's type to be double. Arrays in Swift are a collection of values of any type, and shown here is a common way to initialize an empty array. Two kind of ways that I show to fill an empty array is by using the append method or the += syntax. In order to use the values that are inside of the array, you have to choose the appropriate index. In instances where you'd like to repeat parts of code multiple times, you can use loops. This loop is called a for-in loop, and in this for loop, I is incremented from 1 to 5. Another type of loop that you can use in Swift is the while loop. The main purpose of this loop is to execute code an unknown amount of times, such as running a game. So here we have the winning score declared as a constant and current score declared as a variable. The condition for the while loop is that it will continue to run until the current score is no longer less than the winning score. In the loop, I just incremented the current score by random integer value from 1 through 2. Let's say that we wanted to iterate through the names array. So one way that we could do it is by using a for loop where we allow I to vary from 0 to the size of the names array -1, and we can do -1 automatically by using the less than sign instead of the 3 periods. Let's say that we have another array of stored names, and we want each name in the array to be placed in another array based on the amount of characters inside the name. We can do this by using a for-in loop, which iterates through each name in the names array, and by using conditional statements inside of the for-in loop. We can then assign the name to the letter names array that's based on the character count. To assign values that are not of string type inside of a string type, you can use the / and parentheses, where the value that you want to put into the string is between the parentheses. Also note, if statements execute their code when a condition is met, and for a chain of ifs and elses, like this one shown, once a condition is met, the code for that condition is executed and no other else ifs are executed. So what prints to the screen is the name and to what letter names array the name was inserted into. Switch statements are similar to if statements, but switches consider a value first, then based on the value does a response. When you switch a value, you put the cases for the condition, and unless all the cases are exhausted, you're going to have a default case. Functions in Swift are essentially chunks of code that have a name, and in order to use the chunks of code, you just have to call the name. This is the process to create a function, and this function's purpose is to print to the screen hello. In order to use the function, you just have to type the name with the appropriate parameters, which in this case there are none. This is another function example where the function has two parameters, a double and an integer. And the function's purpose is to return x raised to some power of your choosing. And the return type is a double, where the return symbol is shown as a dash and a greater than sign. Inside of the function, the basic rules for doing a power are conditioned through an if and else chain. When returning a value of some type from a function, the function itself becomes that type. It's also important to note that every possible condition must return the appropriate type. Here I call the function and I put the appropriate values inside of the function's parameters. And it looks like all of the returned values are correct. For classes and structures in Swift, Apple states that they are more like instances than what would normally be called an object. In this example, I create a house instance where I create variables in the instance that have no value assigned to them. So when you do not set a value for variables or constants in an instance, you have to create an initializer. The initializer accepts values at the start of the instance creation, and so you can use those accepted values to assign it to the unassigned values in the instance. For an example of how to use the class, let's make an array of houses. In order to add a house to the houses array, when appending it to the array, we call the name of the class and initialize the values that we want. If we wanted to iterate through the houses array, we could use a for-in loop on the array. Here I print the house instance from the array, but nothing special prints to the screen. In order to print what we want, we have to make the house instance conform to the custom string convertible protocol. When using protocols, we have to conform to what it requires, and in this case it requires a variable name description. Here we can change the location of our house by using a function. I also want to update the description after updating the location. Now after adding that method to the instance, I can update the location of the houses from the iteration of the houses array. So as you can see, the old city location was printed to the screen, then after updating it from the method, the new city name was printed to the screen. Structures and classes are very similar to each other, so I'll just keep this example code and replace the few things that structures require. The previously created method alters the contents of the instance, and in order to do this for structs, you have to put the mutation syntax before the func syntax. When running the code, an error comes up in the for-in loop because of the difference between classes and structures. Classes pass by reference and structures pass by type. In order to overcome the error, you can iterate through the houses array by the index. I hope that you enjoyed this brief overview of Swift. Although there are other things to learn about Swift, such as optionals and error handling, I feel that this video is good enough for you to get started developing apps. And if you have any questions or comments about the video, you can leave them below. Also, if you liked the video and want more free content, you can subscribe.